The scream came first, before the knock, before the warning bell, before anyone had time to think. Elena Voss dropped the water bucket she was carrying and spun toward the sound, her bare feet slipping on wet stone. Something was wrong at the north gate. She could feel it in her chest, a tight pull that had followed her since she was a child, a strange sense that always told her when danger was near. She was 17 years old, thin from years of scraps and long shifts, and she carried no rank in the Ashwood pack. Omega. That was the only word anyone used for her. Not a name, not a family, just a rank that told everyone else they did not have to treat her with respect. She had grown up washing floors, hauling water, and sleeping in a small room at the back of the pack house, while the sons and daughters of higher wolves slept in warm beds, and learned how to fight, how to lead, how to belong. Nobody had ever told her where she came from. When she asked, the answer was always the same, flat and cold. You were found. Be grateful someone took you in. She had stopped asking years ago, but the question never stopped asking itself inside her. The gate bell rang 3 times, sharp and urgent, and every wolf in the yard turned toward the sound. Grant Halden, the alpha of Ashwood, came striding out of the main hall with his second at his side. Both men pulling their shirts straight, their faces hard. "Riders," someone shouted from the wall. "Royal Riders, the King's Own Guard." Elena froze. In 16 years, no one from the royal court had ever come to Ashwood. The pack was small, tucked into the hills, far from the cities where the great packs ruled. It was the kind of place people were sent to disappear. She should have gone back to her work. That was what an Omega did. Stay out of sight when important people arrived, but her feet would not move. Something about the riders pulled at her, the same pull she always felt before storms, before fights, before anything that would change her life. The gates opened, and 6 wolves rode through in dark uniforms stitched with silver thread, the mark of the 12 packs on their chests. In the center rode a man who did not need a uniform to look like he owned the ground beneath him. He sat tall on a black horse, his eyes sweeping over the yard like he was reading every secret the pack was trying to hide. This was Draven Cross, the Alpha King, ruler of every pack under royal law, feared and respected across the land, a man whose name alone was enough to make grown wolves lower their eyes. Elena had heard stories about him her whole life, but nothing prepared her for what happened the moment his gaze crossed hers. His horse stopped. Draven Cross, who had ridden through 100 packs without pausing for anyone, went completely still. His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened. For one heartbeat, the whole yard seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what the king would do. Elena felt her own wolf stir inside her, a feeling so foreign and sudden that she nearly gasped out loud. It was as if something ancient inside her had just opened its eyes for the first time and was staring back at him. "Who is that girl?" Draven said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard like thunder rolling over hills. Grant Halden's face went pale. Elena saw it, the flicker of fear before he composed himself. The same look she had seen from the elders whenever her name came up in conversation. "She is no one, my king," Grant said quickly. "A servant girl. She has no rank." Draven did not look away from her. "Bring her forward." The yard fell silent. Every wolf turned to stare at Elena, and for the first time in her life, she felt every eye in Ashwood fixed on her, not with mockery, but with confusion, as if no one understood why the most powerful man in the kingdom would care about the girl who scrubbed the floors. She stepped forward on shaking legs. Up close, Draven Cross was even more overwhelming. Broad shoulders, sharp gray eyes, a presence that pressed against her skin like heat from a fire. He swung down from his horse and walked toward her slowly, studying her face the way a man studies something he cannot quite believe is real. "Your name," he said. "Elena," she answered. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Elena Voss." Something crossed his face when she said it, something like recognition, though she was certain they had never met. "Voss," he repeated softly. "Where are your parents, Elena Voss?" "I do not know," she said. "I was found here as a baby. No one has ever told me more than that." Draven turned toward Grant Halden, and the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by something colder, something that made the Alpha of Ashwood take a step back without meaning to. "Found," Draven said. "Found where, exactly?" "It was a long time ago, my king," Grant said, choosing his words with visible care. "The details are unclear. We simply took her in out of duty." "Unclear," Draven repeated. He looked back at Elena, and this time his eyes moved over her more carefully, taking in the shape of her face, the color of her eyes, details he seemed to be comparing against a memory only he could see. "Tell me, Elena, have you ever felt like something inside you does not match the life you have been given?" The question hit her like a blow to the chest. It was exactly the feeling she had carried her whole life, the sense that she was living inside a story that was not hers, wearing a name that did not fit. She had never said it out loud to anyone. She did not understand how a stranger, a king she had met only seconds ago, could see it so clearly. Yes, she whispered, every day. Draven's expression did not soften, but something in his shoulders eased, as though her answer had confirmed a suspicion he had been carrying for a long time. I will be staying in Ashwood for a few days, he announced, loud enough for the entire yard to hear. I wish to review the pack's records personally, all of them. A murmur ran through the crowd. Grant Halden's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Of course, my king. Whatever you require. I require the truth, Draven said, and though he was speaking to the Alpha, his eyes stayed on Elena the entire time. That night, Elena could not sleep. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word the king had said. Something inside you does not match the life you have been given. How had he known that? How had a stranger looked at her for less than a minute and touched the exact wound she had carried since she was old enough to understand what the word Omega meant? A soft knock came at her door. She sat up, heart pounding, expecting trouble, but it was only Callum Ashby, a young wolf her age who worked in the stables and was the closest thing she had to a friend in Ashwood. You should not be talking to me tonight, Callum whispered, slipping inside and shutting the door. Half the pack thinks you are cursed. The other half thinks you are about to be executed. Executed for what? Elena said, though her stomach turned at the word. For catching the king's attention, Callum said. Nobody catches the king's attention by accident, Elena. Not unless something is very wrong, or something is very important. I do not understand any of this, she said. Why would he care who I am? Why would anyone care? Callum sat on the edge of her cot, lowering his voice further, though there was no one else to hear. My grandmother worked in the pack house when you were brought here. She used to say strange things, before she got sick. She said the elders locked something away the same year you arrived. A record. A name. She said whatever they hid, it was buried so deep that even asking about it could get a person thrown out of the pack. Elena's pulse quickened. Did she ever tell you what it was? Callum shook his head. She always stopped herself before she said too much. But Elena, listen to me. If the Alpha King is asking about your parents, and the elders are that afraid of the answer, then whatever they hid is not small. It is something they were told to protect with their lives. Neither of them slept much after that. Elena spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, turning her whole life over in her mind, searching for pieces that had never fit. The way certain elders flinched whenever she walked past. The way Grant Halden's mate Mira sometimes looked at her with something close to grief instead of pity. The way no birth record with her name had ever been shown to her, not once, in 17 years. By morning, word had spread through the entire pack that the king had ordered a full review of the old records, the birth registries, the death notices, every scrap of paper the elders had kept locked in the stone archive beneath the main hall. Wolves whispered in corners, falling silent whenever Elena walked by, their eyes following her with a mixture of fear and pity that she had never experienced before. She found Grant Halden near the training yard that afternoon, standing alone, staring at nothing. She had never approached him directly in her life, not once. But something had shifted inside her since the king's arrival, some new courage she did not fully recognize. Alpha Halden, she said. He turned, startled. Please, tell me what you know about where I came from. For a long moment, he only looked at her, and she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something that looked almost like sorrow. There are things, Elena, he said slowly, that were sealed long before you could understand them. Things that were sealed to keep you safe. Safe from what? He opened his mouth to answer, but before a single word left him, a horn sounded from the gate tower, low and long, the signal for an approaching rider. Grant's face drained of color. He turned away from her without another word and strode toward the gate, leaving her standing alone in the yard, with more questions than she had ever carried in her life. Elena watched him go, her heart hammering, the strange pull inside her chest tightening like a rope drawn taut. Whatever secret Ashwood had buried, it was rising to the surface now, and she had the terrible feeling that once it broke free, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. She followed at a distance, staying close to the wall where the shadows were thick, unwilling to return to her chores while so much was happening around her. The rider who thundered through the gate was not one of the king's 6 guards. He wore travel-worn leather instead of the silver-stitched uniform, and his horse was foaming at the mouth from a hard ride. He dropped from the saddle before it had fully stopped and pushed past 2 startled Ashwood wolves to reach Grant Halden. Where is the king? The rider demanded, his voice cracking with exhaustion. I carry a message that cannot wait. He is inside, reviewing the archive, Grant said. What has happened? The rider lowered his voice, but the wind carried fragments of his words to where Elena stood hidden behind a stack of grain barrels. She caught only pieces. Border packs. Missing patrol. A name that made Grant's face turn the color of ash. Nightshade. She did not know the word, had never heard it spoken in Ashwood before, yet it struck something deep inside her, a chord she did not understand but felt in her bones like the echo of a name she had once known and forgotten. Grant Halden turned and ran for the main hall himself, moving faster than Elena had ever seen the older alpha move, the rider close behind him. She pressed herself against the barrels, waiting until they disappeared through the heavy wooden doors, then slipped along the wall toward the side entrance that led to the lower halls, the one the servants used to carry firewood and water without disturbing pack business above. Her heart told her not to go any further. Every rule she had learned since childhood told her to turn back, to return to her chores, to stay small and invisible the way an Omega was supposed to stay. But the pull in her chest was stronger than any rule, stronger than fear, stronger than the years of training that had taught her to make herself as unnoticeable as possible. She crept down the narrow stairwell that led toward the old archive, the stone walls growing cooler and damper with every step. Voices reached her before she saw the room. Grant Halden's voice tight with panic, the messenger's voice hoarse and urgent, and beneath them both, calm and commanding, the voice of Draven Cross. Say it again, the king said, slowly. I want no mistakes in this. The Eastern Watch found signs of a search party near the old mountain pass, the messenger said. Men asking questions in 3 villages, asking about a girl born the same year the royal line fell, asking about Nightshade blood. Silence followed, heavy enough that Elena could hear her own pulse in her ears. They know, Draven said quietly. Somehow, after all these years, they know she may still be alive. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She pressed closer to the doorway, careful to stay in the shadow of the stairwell, straining to hear more, though every instinct screamed that she was standing at the edge of something far too big for her to understand. My king, Grant Halden said, and his voice trembled in a way she had never heard from him before, not once in 17 years. If they trace it back here to Ashwood, everyone in this pack will be in danger. We swore an oath. We were told the fewer people who knew, the safer she would be. And yet I stood in your yard this morning, Draven said, and looked into eyes I have not seen since I was a boy of 10 years old, standing beside a cradle that was burned to ash 3 days later, along with everyone who should have protected it. Do not tell me about oaths, Alpha Halden. Tell me the truth. Is she who I believe she is? There was a long pause. Elena stood frozen on the stairs, her whole body trembling, the word cradle and burned to ash echoing inside her skull like a bell that would not stop ringing. I cannot say the words aloud, Grant finally answered. Not even now, not even to you. The oath binds tighter than that. Then you have already answered me, Draven said, and Elena heard something shift in his voice, something that sounded almost like relief tangled together with dread. 17 years, and she was here the entire time, hidden in plain sight, scrubbing floors while the kingdom searched every corner of the map for her. Elena's knees nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the cold stone wall to steady herself, her mind spinning through every strange look, every closed door, every unanswered question of her entire life, all of it rearranging itself around a single unbearable possibility. She did not know who Nightshade was. She did not know why a cradle had burned, or why a king would remember a girl's eyes from when he was a child. But she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that the answer to all of it was standing only a few feet away from her on the other side of that door, and that her life as she had always known it was already over. A footstep sounded behind her on the stairs, and Elena spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, to find Mira Halden standing there, candle in hand, her face pale with the same grief Elena had noticed so many times before without understanding it. You should not be here, child, Mira whispered, but she did not sound angry. She sounded afraid, and beneath the fear, something that looked almost like sorrow, finally breaking free after being held back for 17 long years. Please, Elena whispered back, her voice shaking. Tell me who I am. Mira's eyes filled with tears, and for one long, aching moment, Elena believed she would finally get an answer. But before Mira could speak a single word, the door at the bottom of the stairwell opened, and Draven Cross stepped out, his gray eyes finding Elena instantly, as though he had known she was there the entire time. Elena, he said quietly, it is time you learned the truth about who you are. The archive room was colder than any part of Ashwood she had ever entered, its stone walls lined with shelves of brittle paper, ledgers stacked from floor to ceiling, the air thick with dust that had not been disturbed in years. Grant Halden stood near a long wooden table, his hands pressed flat against its surface as though he needed it to keep himself upright. The messenger who had ridden in with such urgency was gone, sent away to rest, leaving only the four of them, Elena, Draven, Grant, and Mira, standing in a room that felt far too small for the weight of what was about to be said. Draven pulled out a chair and gestured for Elena to sit, but she shook her head, too restless, too afraid that if she sat down her legs would simply refuse to hold her again. He studied her for a moment, then nodded, understanding something in her that she did not fully understand herself. 17 years ago, Draven began, the kingdom was ruled by a different family, not the Cross line, the Nightshade line, an older bloodline, one that had governed the 12 packs since before written record, wolves born with a gift that let them command others without ever raising a claw. It was said their blood carried something ancient, a mark that appeared in the eyes when their power woke, gold where other wolves showed only brown or blue. Elena's hand rose unconsciously to her own eyes, though she had never once seen gold there. Draven noticed the gesture and continued. The Nightshade family ruled fairly, by most accounts, but not everyone in their court agreed with their methods. There were wolves close to the throne, trusted advisors, who believed the bloodline had grown weak, too gentle to hold the 12 packs together in dangerous times. One of them, a lord named Silas Vane, decided to correct what he saw as a failure of leadership. Grant Halden flinched at the name, and Elena saw Mira reach out and grip his arm, steadying him the way a mate does when a memory becomes too heavy to carry alone. Vane organized a night of fire, Draven said, his voice flattening into something controlled, the way a man speaks when he has practiced saying unbearable words so they will not break him each time. The royal hall was burned with the family inside it. The king, the queen, 2 elder sons, all lost before the sun rose the next morning. It was called a tragedy of poor wiring and dry timber. Nobody dared call it anything else, because Vane had already secured enough loyalty among the 12 packs to make questioning him dangerous. What happened to the rest of the family? Elena asked, though something in her already feared the answer. There was one more child, Draven said, an infant girl, born only months before the fire, kept away from the main hall that night because she had taken ill with a fever. The wolves who cared for her did not wait to ask permission from anyone. They wrapped her in plain cloth, stripped her of anything that marked her as royal, and rode through the night to scatter false trails in every direction. One of those trails led here, to Ashwood, to a pack small enough and far enough from the capital that no one would think to search it. Elena's whole body had gone cold, a strange numbness spreading from her chest outward, as though her mind was trying to protect her from understanding too quickly. I do not understand why you are telling me this, she whispered, though a part of her already did. Draven stepped closer, his gray eyes holding hers with a gentleness that seemed strange coming from a man who commanded 12 packs. Because I was there, Elena. I was a boy of 10, a distant cousin of the Nightshade line, staying at the Royal Hall that season. I remember standing beside your cradle 3 days before the fire. I remember your mother laughing because you would not stop staring at the ceiling, as if you could already see something the rest of us could not. I have carried that memory for 17 years, and this morning, when I rode into this yard, I looked into your eyes and saw her again, exactly as I remembered. Elena pressed a hand against her mouth, tears rising before she could stop them. You are saying I am her, the lost princess. I am saying I believe it with everything in me, Draven said quietly, and I intend to prove it beyond any doubt, so that no one, not Vane's allies, not the doubters in my own court, can ever question your right to what was stolen from you. Grant Halden finally spoke, his voice rough with years of silence finally breaking apart. We were given the child by riders none of us ever saw again. We were told her name must never be spoken, that even the smallest slip could bring death to this entire pack. We raised her as an unranked Omega on purpose, my king. A princess would draw eyes. A servant girl draws none. It was cruel, I know that. I have watched her suffer for it every day of her life. But it kept her breathing. Elena turned to him. Betrayal and grief tangled together in her chest. 17 years, she said, her voice cracking. You let me believe I was nothing. You let the whole pack treat me like I was nothing. I let them believe it so that Vane's people never would look twice at you, Grant said, tears finally slipping down his weathered face. I am not asking for forgiveness, Elena. I am only telling you why. Mira crossed the room and took Elena's hands in her own, her grip warm and trembling. I wanted to tell you so many times, she whispered. Every time you cried yourself to sleep after the other wolves mocked you. Every time you asked me why no one wanted you. I wanted to tell you the truth, that you were wanted more than anyone in this kingdom, that you were loved by a family who never got the chance to raise you. Elena could not speak. The weight of it settled over her all at once. 17 years of loneliness reframed in an instant. Every wound and every silence suddenly explained but not erased. She was still the girl who had scrubbed floors and slept in a narrow cot. But she was also, somehow, the last living piece of a family the entire kingdom believed had been wiped from existence. "Why now?" she finally managed to ask. "Why did you come to Ashwood after 17 years of silence?" Draven's expression darkened. "Because the messenger who arrived tonight brought word that Vane's people have picked up the scent of a search that never should have been possible. Someone is asking questions in the border villages about a girl born the year the royal line fell. If they are asking questions there, it means old trails are being followed again, trails that should have gone cold years ago. They are looking for me," Elena said, the realization settling like a stone in her stomach. "They are looking for anyone who might still carry Nightshade blood," Draven said. "And if Vane learns you exist before I can bring you somewhere safe and prove your identity beyond doubt, he will not hesitate to finish what he started the night your family burned." The words hung in the cold air of the archive, and Elena felt the strange pull in her chest tighten once more. No longer a mystery, but a warning, sharp and clear, telling her that whatever safety she had known in Ashwood, however small and cruel it had been, was already slipping away from her. "What do we do now?" Grant asked, his voice steadying with the practical urgency of an alpha faced with a threat to his pack. "I take her from Ashwood tonight," Draven said, quietly, "before word of my visit spreads any further than it already has. I will not risk Vane's people tracing the trail back here while she remains unprotected." Elena felt panic rise in her throat. Leave Ashwood. Leave the only home she had ever known, cruel as it had been, for a world of royal courts and hidden enemies she did not understand. "I cannot simply leave," she said. "I do not even know how to be who you say I am." Draven's eyes softened, just slightly, the first true gentleness she had seen from him since he rode through the gate. "You do not need to know yet," he said. "You only need to survive long enough to learn, and I intend to make certain that you do." Outside the archive, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters of the old stone building, and somewhere far beyond the walls of Ashwood, in villages she had never seen, men were already asking the questions that would decide whether she lived to claim her name or died before she ever fully understood it. There was no time for a proper goodbye. Draven ordered his guard to prepare the horses before the moon reached its highest point, insisting that Ashwood could not risk even a single extra hour of exposure now that the search for Elena had begun in earnest. She was given a plain traveling cloak, a satchel with a few belongings, and almost no time to process that she was about to leave the only life she had ever known. Callum found her near the stable just as she was tightening the last strap on her saddle, his face pale with worry in the moonlight. "They are saying you are leaving tonight," he said. "They are saying you might be royalty." "I do not know what I am," Elena admitted, her voice barely steady. "I only know I cannot stay here anymore." Callum reached out and took her hand, the same way he had 100 times before when they were children hiding from the older wolves who mocked her. Except this time his grip lingered, as though he understood this might be the last time he ever held it. "Whatever you become," he said, "do not forget who stood beside you when nobody else would." "I will not forget," she promised, and meant it with her whole heart, though even as she said the words she wondered how much of her old life she would be allowed to keep once she stepped fully into her new one. They rode out through the north gate under cover of darkness, 6 of Draven's guards forming a tight ring around Elena, while Draven himself rode just ahead of her, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line as though he expected an attack at any moment. The forest beyond Ashwood was thick and old, the kind of woodland that swallowed sound, and Elena found herself straining to hear anything beyond the soft rhythm of hooves on packed earth. They had been riding for perhaps 2 hours when Draven suddenly raised a closed fist, the signal for the group to stop. Every guard fell silent instantly, their horses shifting nervously beneath them. "What is it?" Elena whispered, her pulse quickening. "Something is following us," Draven said quietly, his nose lifted slightly, testing the air. "Wolves. 3 of them, maybe 4, not ours." Fear spiked through Elena's chest, sharp and immediate, but beneath it, something else stirred, something warm and strange that seemed to rise up from deep inside her without invitation. Her vision sharpened at the edges. The dark woods around her, which had seemed impenetrable a moment ago, suddenly revealed faint outlines she should not have been able to see, shapes moving low between the trees a good distance away. "There," she said before she could stop herself, pointing toward a cluster of shadows to the east. 4 of them, moving toward the ridge. Every guard turned to stare at her in disbelief. Draven's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with something closer to quiet astonishment. "Ordinary eyes cannot see that far in this darkness," he said. "Not even trained trackers." Before Elena could respond, the shadows broke into motion, no longer trying to stay hidden now that they had been spotted. 4 wolves burst from the tree line, moving fast and low, their intent unmistakable. Draven's guards moved instantly into formation, forming a wall between the attackers and Elena. But one of the strangers broke past the line with startling speed, closing the distance toward her before anyone could react. Elena's horse reared in fright, and she was thrown from the saddle, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She scrambled backward, heart hammering, as the attacking wolf closed in, and in that single terrifying moment, something inside her finally broke free. Her vision flooded with a strange golden light, not from outside her but from within her own eyes, and when she raised her hand instinctively to shield herself, the attacking wolf skidded to a sudden halt, whimpering, as though an invisible force had struck him squarely in the chest. He staggered back, confused and frightened, before turning and fleeing into the trees without a single command being spoken aloud. The remaining attackers, seeing their companion flee from a girl who had not so much as raised a weapon, hesitated just long enough for Draven's guards to close in and drive them back into the forest. Within minutes, the woods fell silent again, leaving only the sound of Elena's ragged breathing and the pounding of her own frightened heart. Draven was at her side instantly, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering as though he wanted to check that she was unharmed, without knowing whether it was proper to touch her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "I do not know what just happened," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I did not touch him. I did not even mean to do anything. He just stopped." "That is the mark of your bloodline waking," Draven said quietly, helping her to her feet. "The gift the old stories speak of, the one that lets a nightshade command a lesser wolf without laying a single claw on them. I had hoped it would not surface so soon, before you were ready to understand it, but perhaps it decided the timing for us." Elena stared down at her own trembling hands, half expecting them to look different somehow, though they appeared exactly as they always had. "Will it happen again?" she asked. "Almost certainly," Draven said, "and we will need to teach you to control it before it controls you instead." They rode through the remainder of the night without further incident, though Elena noticed the guards glancing at her differently now, a mixture of caution and something close to reverence that unsettled her more than open hostility would have. By the time the sun rose over the horizon, they had reached the outer edges of Draven's territory, a sprawling stronghold built into the side of a mountain, its stone walls rising higher than anything Elena had ever seen in her life. The gates opened to let them through, and Elena found herself staring up at towers and banners bearing the Cross family crest, servants and guards moving through wide courtyards with a purpose and confidence entirely foreign to the quiet desperation of Ashwood. She felt impossibly small amid it all, a servant girl dressed in a plain traveling cloak, surrounded by a world that was, according to everyone around her, somehow already hers by right of blood. Word of her arrival spread through the stronghold faster than Draven could control it. By mid-morning, members of his court had gathered in the great hall under the pretense of a routine council meeting, though Elena could feel the true purpose of the gathering the moment she stepped through the doors. Every eye in the room turned to study her, weighing her, measuring her against whatever image they carried of the lost Nightshade princess. A tall, sharp-featured man near the front of the hall stepped forward before Draven could even finish making the introduction. His uniform marked him as one of Draven's senior advisors, and his expression carried an open skepticism that made no attempt to hide itself. "My king," the man said, his voice smooth and carrying easily across the hall. "Forgive me, but you cannot expect this council to accept the word of a servant girl from a backwater pack as proof of royal blood. The kingdom has mourned the Nightshade line for 17 years. To resurrect that grief on nothing more than a resemblance would be reckless. This is Lord Silas Vane," Draven said quietly to Elena, and she felt every muscle in her body go rigid at the name she had heard whispered in the archive only hours earlier. "My senior advisor, and among the most trusted voices on this council." Elena stared at the man who had, according to Draven's own account, burned an entire royal family to ash 17 years ago, and felt the strange golden warmth stir behind her eyes once more, as though something ancient inside her recognized him even before her mind fully understood who he was. She forced herself to keep her expression calm, though her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she feared the entire hall could hear it. Draven had warned her on the ride up the mountain that Vane must never learn what she already knew, not until they had proof strong enough to remove him from power without warning him first. If Vane suspected that Elena knew the truth about the fire, he would move against her long before any council could rule on her identity. "Lord Vane raises a fair concern," Draven said smoothly, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Which is why I do not intend to ask this council to accept her identity on resemblance alone. There are old tests that have not been used since the founding of the 12 packs, that can confirm Nightshade blood beyond any doubt. A murmur ran through the gathered nobles. An older woman near the side of the hall, her hair silver and her posture rigid with age and authority, stepped forward. The blood flame test, she said. I did not think anyone still remembered how it was performed. I remember, Draven said. I watched it performed once, when I was a child, on a cousin who wished to prove her claim to a minor holding. It requires only a drop of blood and an old iron bowl blessed by the founding families. If the blood carries the Nightshade mark, the flame will burn gold instead of orange. There is no way to fake the result, and no way to force it through trickery. Vane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, so briefly that Elena might have missed it entirely if she had not been searching his face for exactly that kind of reaction. A charming tradition, he said, his voice still smooth, still carrying that same practiced calm. But such an important decision should not rest on old superstition. Perhaps it would be wiser to wait, to gather more evidence, before disrupting the stability of this kingdom with claims of a resurrected bloodline. Stability, Draven repeated, and for the first time since Elena had met him, she heard a dangerous edge slide into his voice. Is that truly your concern, Lord Vane? Or is it something else? The hall fell silent. Vane's eyes flicked toward Draven, sharp and assessing, though his expression never fully cracked. I only wish to protect the crown from scandal, my king. Nothing more. Then you will have no objection to the test being performed tomorrow, before the full council, Draven said, and it was not a question. If Elena Voss is not who I believe her to be, the matter will end there, and no further claim will ever be made. But if she is, this kingdom deserves to know the truth without further delay. Vane inclined his head in a shallow, reluctant bow. As you wish, my king. The council meeting ended shortly after, the nobles filing out in small clusters, whispering among themselves, casting glances at Elena that ranged from curious to openly hostile. She remained near the back of the hall, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in less than a single day, until a woman approached her, younger than most of the council members, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and a uniform that marked her as one of Draven's military officers rather than a court noble. You looked like you needed a friendly face in that room, the woman said, offering a small, genuine smile. Rowan Blake, I command the king's personal guard. When I am not being dragged into council meetings I have no patience for. Elena, she answered, grateful for even a small moment of warmth in a hall that had felt so thick with suspicion. I know who you are, Rowan said, though not unkindly. Half the mountain knows by now. News like this does not stay quiet for long, no matter how carefully the king tries to manage it. She studied Elena for a moment, her expression turning more serious. Watch yourself around Vane. I have served this court for 6 years, and I have never once seen the king so certain about anything. If he believes you are the lost princess, then I believe it too. But Vane did not build his position on this council by accident. Men like him do not simply accept defeat, they plan around it. Do you think he will try to stop the blood flame test? Elena asked. I think, Rowan said carefully, that a man who has spent 17 years believing a threat was safely buried will not sit quietly while it rises back out of the ground. Stay close to the king tonight. Do not wander the halls alone, not even to the kitchens for water, not even to the gardens for air. Promise me, Elena promised, though the warning settled over her like a heavy cloak, adding to the exhaustion of a day that had already asked more of her than she believed she had left to give. That evening, Draven arranged for her to be given quarters near his own chambers, a decision that raised more than a few eyebrows among the court staff but which he insisted upon without apology. The rooms were finer than anything Elena had ever slept in. A soft bed with clean linens, a window that looked out over the mountain valley below, a wardrobe stocked with clothing far more elegant than the simple servant's dresses she had worn her entire life. And yet, sitting alone in the quiet of that unfamiliar room, she felt more lost than she had felt scrubbing floors in Ashwood. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Draven standing there, no longer dressed in his traveling clothes but in simpler attire, the weight of the crown momentarily set aside, leaving only a tired man who had clearly not slept properly and longer than he cared to admit. I wanted to make certain you were settling in, he said, and to apologize for Vane. He is not an easy man to sit across a council table from, even on ordinary days. You said he burned my family, Elena said quietly, closing the door behind him so their words would not carry into the hallway. And now I am expected to sit in a room with him and pretend I do not know that. I know it is an impossible thing to ask, Draven said. But if you show him even a flicker of what you know, He will understand that his secret is no longer safe, and a man like Vane does not wait patiently to be exposed. He acts first, and he acts decisively. I need you to survive long enough for the blood flame test to prove your claim before this council, because once it does, removing him from power becomes a matter of law rather than accusation. Elena sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond words. Yesterday I was scrubbing floors, she said. Today I am supposed to outmaneuver the man who murdered my family. I do not know how to be either of those people anymore. Draven crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his gray eyes steady and unexpectedly gentle. You do not have to be anyone other than exactly who you are right now, he said. The girl who saw 4 wolves hidden in darkness that no ordinary eyes could have found. The girl who stopped an attacker without lifting a single claw. Whatever else you become, that strength was already inside you long before anyone told you your name. For a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet between them filled with something neither seemed ready to name. Then a sharp knock sounded at the door, urgent and hurried, and Rowan Blake's voice came through the wood, tight with alarm. My king, she said, you need to come now. Something has happened in the lower archive. Records are missing, and one of the night guards has been found unconscious near the vault. Raven rose instantly, his expression hardening back into the king Elena had first met in the Ashwood yard. Stay here, he said. Bar the door if you must. I will return as soon as I can. He was gone before Elena could respond, the door closing behind him, leaving her alone in the unfamiliar room with her heart pounding, and the unshakable certainty that whatever Vane had begun that night, it was only the first move in a far larger and far more dangerous game. She paced the length of the unfamiliar room for what felt like hours, unable to sit still, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. Every creak of the old stronghold made her flinch. Every distant voice in the hallway sent her heart into her throat. She thought of barring the door as Draven had instructed, but something told her that hiding behind wood and iron would not protect her from a man who had already burned down an entire royal hall without ever being caught. Near midnight, a soft sound at her window pulled her attention away from the door entirely. She turned just in time to see the latch shift on its own, the window easing open though she had checked it herself only an hour before and found it firmly locked. Cold mountain air spilled into the room, carrying with it a faint, unfamiliar scent, sharp and metallic, nothing like the clean pine and stone smell that had filled the stronghold since her arrival. Elena backed away from the window instinctively, her pulse hammering, and watched as a shadow slipped over the sill and dropped silently onto the floor of her room. The intruder wore dark clothing that covered every inch of skin except a narrow slit for the eyes, and he moved with the practiced silence of someone who had done this many times before. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could leave her throat, the same golden warmth from the forest attack surged up behind her eyes, faster and stronger this time, as though her body had learned something from the first encounter and was ready to answer the threat without waiting for her permission. Stop, she said, her voice low but carrying a weight she did not recognize as her own. The intruder froze mid-step, his entire body locking in place as though invisible chains had wrapped around his limbs. He strained against whatever force held him, his breathing ragged behind the dark cloth covering his face, but he could not move a single step closer to her. Elena stared at her own hands in disbelief, the golden light fading from her vision as quickly as it had come, though the intruder remained frozen exactly where he stood. She backed toward the door, refusing to look away from him for even a second, and threw it open, calling out into the hallway with everything her lungs could manage. Guards arrived within moments, drawn by her voice and by Rowan Blake, who had been posted just down the corridor after Draven left for the archive. Rowan took one look at the frozen intruder and drew her blade immediately, though it proved unnecessary, since the man remained utterly unable to defend himself. How is this possible? One of the guards muttered, staring at the strange stillness gripping the intruder's body. It does not matter how, Rowan snapped. Secure him, now. The guards bound the intruder's hands and dragged him from the room, and only once he was gone did Elena feel the strange hold over him release, her own strength draining from her all at once, leaving her legs weak and trembling. Rowan caught her before she could sink to the floor, guiding her to sit on the edge of the bed while shouting orders for someone to find the king immediately. Draven arrived within minutes, his face pale with a fear Elena had not yet seen from him, a fear that seemed to vanish the instant he confirmed she was unharmed, replaced almost immediately by a cold and controlled fury that radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Who sent you?" he demanded of the captured intruder, who had been forced to his knees in the hallway outside Elena's door. The man said nothing, his eyes darting toward the shadows as though searching for an escape that no longer existed. Draven crouched in front of him, his voice dropping low and dangerous. "You will answer me, or you will answer to a council that has very little patience for wolves who attack royal blood inside my own stronghold." Still the man remained silent, his jaw clenched tight, until Rowan pulled the dark cloth away from his face, revealing features none of them recognized, though the crest, stitched discreetly into the collar of his shirt, told its own story. A small silver mark shaped like a coiled serpent, a symbol Elena had never seen before but which caused Draven's expression to harden into something close to rage. "That mark belongs to Vane's personal guard," Draven said quietly. "The ones he trained himself, outside official channels, answerable only to him." "Then he has already made his move," Rowan said grimly, "before the blood flame test could even take place." Draven rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the captured man with cold precision. "Take him to the lower cells. I want him questioned properly, and I want 2 guards stationed outside Elena's door at all times, day and night, without exception." As the guards led the intruder away, Draven turned to Elena, kneeling in front of her exactly as he had earlier that evening, though his expression now carried none of the earlier softness, only sharp, focused determination. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "Everything." She recounted it as steadily as she could manage, the window opening on its own, the intruder's silent approach, the golden warmth that had risen inside her without warning, and frozen him in place before he could reach her. Draven listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening further with every detail. "This is more advanced than what happened on the road," he said once she finished. "That night, you startled an attacker enough to make him flee. Tonight, you held a trained assassin completely immobile, long enough for help to arrive. Your gift is awakening faster than I expected, faster than I have ever heard of in the old records." "Is that good or bad?" Elena asked, still shaking from the encounter. "Both," Draven admitted. "It means you may be able to protect yourself far sooner than I hoped. But it also means Vane will see you as a far greater threat than a simple claim on the throne. A nightshade who can command lesser wolves without lifting a hand is not someone he can afford to leave alive, blood flame test or not." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of everything pressing down harder than it had all day. "Then he will try again." "Yes," Draven said, without softening the truth. "He will. But he failed tonight, and failure will make him reckless. Reckless men make mistakes, and mistakes are exactly what I need if I am going to remove him from this council, before he tries something the guards cannot stop in time." He rose and moved to the window, checking the latch himself, testing it twice before satisfied it would hold. "I should not have left you alone tonight," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I underestimated how quickly he would move." "You could not have known," Elena said, though gratitude for his concern warmed something inside her chest, despite the fear still coursing through her veins. "I should have known," Draven said, turning back to face her, his gray eyes darker than she had seen them before. "Vane has spent 17 years believing his secret was buried forever. Tonight, for the first time, he understood it was not. A man like that does not simply accept defeat quietly. He fights until there is nothing left to fight with." Outside, the mountain wind howled against the stone walls of the stronghold, and somewhere below, in the lower cells, a captured assassin sat in silence, refusing to speak, while somewhere else within those same walls, Lord Silas Vane was already beginning to plan his next move, one that would prove far more dangerous than anything Elena had yet faced. Morning arrived with a strange, brittle calm over the stronghold, the kind of quiet that settles over a place after violence has passed through it but before anyone fully understands what comes next. Elena had barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams filled with fire and gold light, and by the time a servant knocked to inform her that the council had gathered early to proceed with the blood flame test, she felt as though she had aged years in a single night. The great hall looked different in daylight, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto a long stone table, where an ancient iron bowl had been placed at its center, its surface tarnished with age, etched with symbols Elena did not recognize. The silver-haired woman from the previous council meeting stood beside it, her expression solemn, clearly the one entrusted with performing the old ritual. "This is Lady Osgood," Draven said quietly as they approached the table together. "She has served 3 generations of this council, and is the only person remaining who remembers how the test is properly conducted." The hall filled quickly, nobles taking their seats along both sides of the long table, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to open hostility. Vane sat near the front, his posture relaxed, his face carefully arranged into an expression of polite interest that did not match the tension Elena could sense radiating from him despite his composure. "Before we begin," Vane said, rising smoothly from his seat, "I would like to raise a formal concern." Last night, an intruder was captured near the girls' quarters, an intruder who, I am told, wore a mark suggesting some connection to my own household guard. I want it stated clearly, before this council, that I have no knowledge of any such man, nor any reason to wish harm upon a girl I have met only once. Draven's eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice remained level. The council has heard your denial, Lord Vane. It will be weighed alongside whatever the prisoner reveals under proper questioning. Has he spoken yet? One of the older nobles asked. Not yet, Rowan Blake answered from her position near the hall's entrance. But he will. Vane inclined his head and returned to his seat, and Elena forced herself to keep her expression neutral, though every part of her wanted to shout the truth she already knew, that this same man had ordered a royal family burned alive 17 years earlier, and had very nearly succeeded in silencing the last of that bloodline just hours before. She held her tongue, remembering Draven's warning, and instead focused on Lady Osgood, who was preparing the ancient bowl with slow, careful movements. The test is simple in its mechanics, if not in its meaning, Lady Osgood explained to the gathered council, though her words seemed directed mostly at Elena. A single drop of blood, placed within the bowl, and a flame lit beneath it using oil blessed generations ago by the founding families of the 12 packs. If the blood carries no trace of the old royal line, the flame will burn as any ordinary fire does, orange and unremarkable. If the blood carries the nightshade mark, the flame will turn gold, and will hold that color for as long as the blood remains within the bowl. Elena stepped forward when Lady Osgood gestured for her hands trembling slightly as she extended one finger over the bowl. A small blade, ceremonial and precise, drew the smallest possible drop of blood, and Elena watched it fall into the tarnished iron container, disappearing into its shadowed depths. Lady Osgood lit the oil beneath the bowl with a practiced motion, and for one agonizing moment, nothing happened at all. The hall held its breath collectively, and Elena felt her heart clench with a fear she had not expected. The fear that after everything, after the fire in the forest and the assassin in her room, she might simply be an ordinary girl after all, with nothing but coincidence and hope binding her to a family she had never known. Then the flame caught. It rose from the bowl in a single smooth column, and as it climbed, its color shifted, orange bleeding away into a deep, brilliant gold that filled the hall with a soft, warm light unlike anything a natural fire could produce. Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. Even Vane, seated near the front, could not fully mask the flicker of alarm that crossed his features before he smoothed it away again. The blood carries the mark, Lady Osgood announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the hall. This council bears witness. Elena Voss carries nightshade blood, confirmed beyond any doubt the old rites can provide. The hall erupted into a storm of voices, some disbelieving, some awed, a few already bowing their heads in a gesture of respect Elena had never once received in her entire life. Draven rose from his seat, and though his face remained composed, Elena could see the profound relief in his eyes, the weight of 17 years finally beginning to lift. This council will formally recognize Elena Voss as the last surviving heir of the Nightshade line, Draven announced, his voice carrying the full authority of the Alpha King. Her claim to the ancestral seat, long dormant, will be restored, and any threat made against her will be treated as a threat against the crown itself. Vane rose slowly from his seat, his expression once again composed into careful neutrality, though Elena caught the tightness in his jaw, the barely restrained fury simmering just beneath his calm exterior. "The council congratulates you, my lady," he said, his voice smooth despite everything. 17 years is a long time to wait for such news. "It is," Elena said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since arriving at the stronghold, allowing just enough of her knowledge to show through her expression that she saw the flicker of unease pass across his face before he could fully hide it. "A very long time." The council meeting dissolved into a flurry of activity, nobles approaching to offer formal greetings, servants rushing to prepare proper quarters befitting her newly confirmed status, messengers already being dispatched to spread word throughout the 12 packs that the lost princess had been found and confirmed. Elena moved through it all in a daze, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from invisible servant girl to the center of every conversation in the hall. It was Rowan who finally pulled her aside once the worst of the commotion had passed, guiding her into a quieter side chamber where they could speak without a dozen eyes watching every word. "The prisoner spoke," Rowan said quietly, "just before the test began. I did not want to interrupt the proceedings, but you need to hear this now." "What did he say?" Elena asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "He confirmed he was sent by Vane," Rowan said. "But there is more. He said Vane did not act alone that night 17 years ago either. He said there is another name, someone still embedded deep within this court, someone who helped Vane cover the truth for all these years, and has continued protecting him ever since. Did he give a name? Elena asked, her pulse quickening. Rowan's expression turned grim. He said he did not know it himself, only that Vane referred to this person as the Shadow, someone trusted enough to move through the stronghold without suspicion. Someone who could reach places even Vane's own guard could not. Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the hall beyond the chamber walls. The blood flame test had confirmed her identity before the entire council, had exposed Vane's guilt in the eyes of everyone who witnessed it, and yet somehow, instead of feeling safer, she felt more exposed than ever, knowing that somewhere within these very walls, another enemy remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. Draven ordered Vane's arrest before the sun had fully set that same day, unwilling to give him another night of freedom now that the council had formally recognized Elena's claim. Rowan gathered a team of trusted guards, wolves she had personally trained and vetted over years of service, and moved toward Vane's private chambers with grim efficiency. They found the rooms empty. Not merely empty, but stripped. Drawers pulled open and left bare. A wardrobe emptied of its finer clothing. Ledgers and correspondence removed from the desk where they should have sat undisturbed. Vane had known, somehow, that his time was running out, and he had prepared an escape long before the blood flame test ever confirmed Elena's identity. He cannot have gone far, Rowan said, storming back into the great hall where Draven and Elena waited for news. The mountain passes are guarded. Every gate has been watched since last night's incident. Every gate you know of, Draven said grimly. Vane has served this court for over a decade. If there is a hidden way through this mountain, he would know it better than any of us. Elena felt the golden warmth stir faintly behind her eyes again, not the sharp surge that came with immediate danger, but something quieter, almost like a compass needle turning toward a direction she could not yet explain. She closed her eyes, focusing on the strange sensation, and found herself picturing, without quite understanding how, a narrow passage cut into the eastern face of the mountain, hidden behind a waterfall that fed the stronghold's lower gardens. There is a way out through the eastern gardens, she said suddenly, opening her eyes to find both Draven and Rowan staring at her in surprise. Behind the waterfall. I do not know how I know that, but I am certain of it. Draven exchanged a quick glance with Rowan before nodding sharply. The old builders of this stronghold were Nightshade allies once, generations ago. It is possible the passage was recorded somewhere in the royal archives you would have no memory of ever seeing, yet some instinct in your blood remembers it regardless. They moved quickly, a full contingent of guards following Draven and Rowan through the winding lower corridors of the stronghold. Elena kept close between them despite her protests that she wished to help rather than be shielded. The gardens, usually peaceful with their careful rows of herbs and flowering vines, felt eerily quiet as they approached the waterfall, its steady roar the only sound breaking the mountain silence. Behind the curtain of falling water, exactly as Elena had somehow known, a narrow crack in the stone revealed a passage barely wide enough for a single wolf to pass through at a time. Fresh scuff marks in the damp earth confirmed that someone had used it recently, and Draven's expression hardened into cold resolve. He is running, Draven said, which means he knows he cannot win a fair fight before this council. But a cornered wolf is often the most dangerous. They pursued the passage single file, torches lighting the way through a tunnel that clearly predated the current stronghold by many generations, its walls carved with old symbols that mirrored some of the markings Elena had seen etched into the ancient iron bowl during the blood flame test. The tunnel eventually opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop into the valley below, and there, waiting with a small group of his personal guard, stood Silas Vane. He did not attempt to flee further. Instead, he turned to face them with a calm that seemed almost rehearsed, as though he had always known this confrontation would eventually come, regardless of how carefully he had tried to delay it. You found the passage faster than I expected, Vane said, his eyes settling on Elena with an expression that mixed grudging respect with clear hostility. The blood truly does remember, it seems, even when the mind does not. It is over, Vane, Draven said, stepping forward, his own guards fanning out to close off any remaining escape route along the narrow ledge. The council has confirmed her identity. Your guard has confirmed your involvement in the attack against her. There is nowhere left for you to run. Perhaps not for me, Vane said, and something in his tone made Elena's stomach tighten with dread. But I did not survive 17 years by relying only on myself. He raised one hand in a slow, deliberate signal, and from the shadows further along the ledge, another figure stepped forward. Someone Elena recognized instantly with a shock that stole the breath from her lungs. Mira Halden. Grant Halden's own mate, The woman who had comforted Elena through countless nights of loneliness in Ashwood, who had looked at her with grief and sorrow for 17 years, stood beside Vane with an expression Elena had never seen on her before, cold and resigned, as though a long-held mask had finally been allowed to fall away. "Mira," Elena whispered, unable to fully process what she was seeing. "What is this?" "I am sorry, child," Mira said quietly, though her voice carried none of the warmth Elena remembered from all those years in Ashwood. "I never wanted things to unfold this way, but some debts, once made, cannot simply be walked away from." "She is the shadow," Rowan said grimly, understanding arriving all at once. "The one who has been protecting Vane from within his own court connections all these years." "Ashwood was never simply a place to hide a lost princess," Vane said, a cruel satisfaction creeping into his voice now that his secret ally had finally been revealed. "It was chosen precisely because Mira had already agreed, years before you ever arrived there, to ensure that if the child ever surfaced, she would be the first to know." Elena felt sick, betrayal twisting through her chest even sharper than it had the night she first learned the truth of her identity. Grant Halden's guilt over hiding her had felt, in its own painful way, like an act of protection, however cruel its methods. But this, Mira's decades of quiet grief masking something far darker, felt like a wound she had never even known she was carrying until this very moment. "Why?" Elena asked, her voice breaking despite her effort to remain composed. "Why would you help him do this to my family?" Mira's composure finally cracked, just slightly, grief flickering across her features before she smoothed it away again. "Because Vane made certain, long ago, that refusing him would cost me everything I loved in this world. You were not the only one hidden that night, Elena. My own daughter's life was the price of my silence, and I have paid it every single day since." The revelation hung in the mountain air, heavy and complicated, and even as fury and betrayal warred within her, Elena felt something else stir too, an unwilling flicker of understanding for a woman who had been trapped by the same man for reasons of her own. But there was no time to untangle the complicated grief of it further. Vane, seeing the momentary distraction his revelation had caused, moved fast, faster than Elena expected from a man his age, lunging not toward Draven or Rowan, but directly toward her, closing the distance across the narrow ledge with terrifying speed. The golden warmth surged behind Elena's eyes instantly, stronger than it had ever risen before, and this time she did not simply freeze her attacker in place. The force of it drove outward like an invisible wave, catching not only Vane but two of his nearby guards as well, throwing all three backward off their feet and pinning them helplessly against the stone wall of the ledge, unable to move a single muscle despite their evident strain against whatever unseen force held them. Draven's guards moved in instantly to secure the immobilized men, and in the sudden, stunned silence that followed, Elena stood trembling at the center of it all, staring at her own hands with a mixture of awe and fear, fully understanding for the first time just how much power had been sleeping inside her, waiting 17 years for the moment it would finally be needed. Vane and his captured guards were dragged back through the hidden passage and placed under heavy watch in the deepest cells of the stronghold, far below the halls where nobles walked and council meetings were held. Mira was taken as well, though Draven ordered her held separately, away from Vane, once Elena quietly asked that she not be forced to share a cell with the man who had trapped her into betrayal so many years ago. The following days passed in a blur of formal proceedings. A full council tribunal was called to examine the evidence against Vane, and though he attempted at first to maintain his composure, the testimony of his own captured guard, combined with Mira's reluctant but detailed account of the fire that had destroyed the Nightshade family, left no room for doubt. He was stripped of his title, his lands, and his seat on the council, sentenced to remain imprisoned within the deepest chambers of the mountain for the remainder of his life, far from any position of influence ever again. Mira's case proved more complicated. Draven, along with several senior members of the council, recognized that she had acted under threat rather than ambition, that her decades of silence had cost her a daughter she still grieved openly during her testimony. Elena, despite the raw betrayal she still carried, found herself speaking on Mira's behalf during the final tribunal session, unable to fully condemn a woman who had also been a victim of Vane's cruelty, even as she had participated in prolonging Elena's own suffering. She did wrong, Elena told the council, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. But she did not act from cruelty. She acted from fear, the same fear that kept an entire pack silent about my existence for 17 years. I do not believe punishing her as harshly as Vane will bring back what either of us lost. I ask only that she be watched carefully, and given the chance to prove whether her remaining years can be spent making amends rather than continuing old debts. The council, moved by Elena's unexpected mercy, agreed to a lesser sentence, permanent exile from any position of court influence, but freedom to live quietly under continued watch, rather than imprisonment. Grant Halden, devastated by the revelation of his mate's hidden betrayal, chose to step down from his position as Alpha of Ashwood, unable to continue leading a pack built upon secrets he had not fully understood himself. With the immediate danger contained, the stronghold slowly began to settle into a new kind of normal, though Elena found herself struggling to adjust to a life so completely different from anything she had known before. Servants who had once ignored her now curtsied when she passed. Nobles who had questioned her legitimacy now sought her favor with careful, practiced smiles. The transformation from invisible Omega to recognized princess had happened so quickly that some nights she still woke expecting to find herself back in her narrow cot in Ashwood, half convinced the entire experience had been an elaborate dream. It was Draven who noticed her struggling most clearly, finding her one evening standing alone on a balcony overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the distant hills in deep orange and gold. "You have been quiet since the tribunal ended," he said, joining her at the railing. "I do not know how to be this person everyone expects me to be," Elena admitted. "A week ago, I was scrubbing floors and being ignored by everyone around me. Now nobles bow when I walk past, and I am expected to know how to behave like royalty when I have never once been taught what that means." "You do not need to become someone else," Draven said, echoing words he had spoken to her once before, though this time they carried a deeper weight, born from everything they had survived together since then. The girl who saw wolves in darkness no ordinary eyes could find, who stopped an assassin without lifting a hand, who spoke mercy for a woman who had wronged her. That girl is exactly the kind of leader this kingdom needs. You do not need a crown to already carry that strength within you. Elena turned to face him fully, searching his gray eyes for any sign of the careful distance he had maintained between them since her arrival, the formal boundaries of king and newly recognized princess that had governed every interaction between them so far. She found instead something warmer, something that had clearly been growing quietly beneath the surface of every conversation they had shared since the moment his horse had stopped in the Ashwood yard. "Why did you truly come looking for records that day?" she asked softly. "You could have simply left Ashwood without ever confronting the truth. Why risk everything to uncover a secret that had remained safely buried for 17 years? Draven was quiet for a long moment, his expression carrying the weight of a confession he had perhaps not intended to make so directly. "Because the moment I saw your eyes in that yard," he said, "I felt something I had not felt in 17 years, not since I stood beside your cradle as a child and believed, foolishly, that the world was still a safe place. I told myself I was searching for the truth about a lost princess. But some part of me, even then, understood I was searching for you specifically, not merely for the confirmation of an old bloodline." Elena felt her heart tighten with an emotion she had not expected to feel, so soon after everything that had happened, warmth blooming quietly beneath the exhaustion and grief that had defined so much of the past week. "I do not know how to trust easily," she admitted. "Everyone I believed cared for me in Ashwood turned out to be hiding something. I do not know how to separate what is real from what is simply duty and old prophecy." "Then we will take the time to learn that together," Draven said, reaching out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, before gently taking her hand in his own. "There is no old prophecy that requires me to feel what I feel when I look at you, Elena. That part is entirely mine to choose, and I have already chosen it." Neither of them spoke further for a long moment, the sunset deepening into rich purples and blues over the distant valley, the quiet warmth between them a small, fragile thing amid everything else the past week had demanded of her. But even as Elena allowed herself, for the first time in days, to simply breathe and feel something close to peace, a messenger arrived at the balcony entrance, breathless and urgent, carrying news that shattered the calm as quickly as it had settled over them. "My king," the messenger said, bowing hastily. "Forgive the interruption, but there is word from the lower cells. Lord Vane has escaped." The warmth of the evening shattered instantly. Draven released Elena's hand and turned to the messenger with the same cold, focused urgency she had seen on the night the first assassin slipped through her window. "How?" he demanded. "He was under heavy guard, deep within the mountain, with no hidden passage anywhere near his cell." "The guards on duty were found unconscious, my king," the messenger said. "Not harmed, simply asleep, as though something had been slipped into their food or water. Whoever helped him escape this time knew the schedule down to the exact hour." Rowan Blake arrived moments later, having already begun organizing a search of the lower levels, her expression grim with barely restrained frustration. "There is more," she said. "Reports are coming in from 3 separate border villages. Wolves are gathering, armed, wearing the same serpent mark we found on the assassin who came for Elena. It seems Vane spent his years on this council building more than political influence. He has been quietly assembling a force loyal only to him, hidden outside the official pack structure entirely. How large? Draven asked. Large enough to be concerning, Rowan said. Perhaps 80 wolves, possibly more, though our estimates are still rough. Vayne must have been planning this contingency long before tonight, in case his position on the council ever collapsed. Elena felt the golden warmth stir behind her eyes again, no longer simply a warning of nearby danger, but something steadier now, almost like a low, constant hum beneath her skin, as though her body understood a larger confrontation was approaching, and was already beginning to prepare itself. He does not intend to simply flee into hiding, Elena said slowly, the realization settling over her with cold clarity. He intends to fight for the throne directly. He has spent 17 years believing the Nightshade line was gone. Now that it has returned, and his own guilt has been exposed before the entire council, he has nothing left to lose by attempting to seize power outright. That would explain the gathering forces, Draven said, his jaw tightening. If he cannot rule quietly from behind the throne any longer, he means to take it by force instead. The stronghold shifted into a state of controlled urgency over the following days, messengers riding out to every corner of Draven's territory, rallying loyal packs while Rowan organized the defense of the mountain itself. Elena found herself drawn into war councils she had never imagined attending only weeks earlier, sitting beside Draven as maps were spread across long tables, positions debated, strategies argued late into the night. She also began, at Draven's insistence, formal training to better understand and control the power that had already saved her life twice. An elderly wolf named Elias Thorne, one of the last living scholars familiar with old Nightshade traditions, was brought to the stronghold to guide her through the careful process of learning to summon her gift deliberately, rather than relying on instinct alone. The old records describe it as a call rather than a command, Elias explained during one of their early sessions in a quiet study filled with dusty scrolls. Your ancestors did not force obedience through raw strength alone. They called upon something already present within lesser wolves, a natural instinct to yield to true authority when it was offered with clarity and confidence rather than fear. It only seems to work when I am afraid, Elena admitted, frustrated after another failed attempt to summon even the faintest golden warmth without the presence of immediate danger. How do I call upon it deliberately, without needing someone attacking me first? Fear is simply the first door your body found, Elias said patiently. There are other doors: confidence, conviction, a clear sense of purpose. The gift responds most strongly to sincerity, Elena, not merely to danger. Find something you believe in absolutely, and the power will follow that belief far more reliably than it follows fear alone. She practiced for hours each day, slowly learning to summon faint traces of the golden warmth through calm concentration rather than panic, though full control remained frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, Rowan's scouts continued tracking Vayne's gathering forces, reporting that his numbers had grown even larger than first estimated, swelled by wolves from smaller packs who resented Draven's rule, or who had been quietly cultivated by Vayne over years of careful political maneuvering. 10 days after the escape, a scout arrived at the stronghold gates just before dawn, exhausted from a hard ride, bearing news that could no longer wait for a formal council session. Vayne's forces are moving, the scout reported directly to Draven and Rowan in the war room, Elena standing close by, refusing to be excluded from information that concerned her more directly than anyone else in the room. They march toward the mountain even now. By our estimates, they will reach the outer valley within 2 days. 2 days, Draven repeated, studying the map spread across the table, his finger tracing the narrow mountain passes that led toward the stronghold. That gives us little time to gather reinforcements from the farther packs. We do not need every pack in the 12 to answer, Rowan said, studying the terrain herself. These passes are narrow enough to be defended by a smaller, disciplined force, provided we hold the high ground before Vayne's army arrives. Elena stared at the map, at the narrow lines representing mountain paths that would soon be filled with wolves prepared to fight and possibly die over a throne that, only weeks earlier, she had not even known existed for her to claim. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, heavier than anything she had carried since leaving Ashwood. This is happening because of me, she said quietly. If I had never been found, if the truth had stayed buried, none of this would be happening. No one would be marching toward this mountain preparing to fight. Draven turned to her immediately, his expression firm despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes after days of urgent preparation. This is happening because Vayne murdered an entire family 17 years ago and has spent every year since hiding that crime behind a position of trusted power, he said. It is not your existence that caused this war, Elena. It is his crime, finally catching up to him after far too long escaping consequence. You are not the cause of this danger. You are simply the reason it can finally be ended. Elias Thorne, who had been quietly observing the war council from a corner of the room, stepped forward at that moment, his expression thoughtful. There may be another path, he said, one that does not require an even exchange of forces along the mountain passes. Speak plainly, Elias, Draven said. The old records describe more than the ability to command a single lesser wolf, Elias said carefully. They describe an ability, rarely used and rarely successful, allowing a true Nightshade heir to call upon the loyalty of an entire gathered force at once, provided the heir stands before them directly, and provided her claim and her cause are entirely genuine. It would require Elena to face Vane's army directly, without hiding behind the mountain's natural defenses, which carries obvious and significant risk. The room fell silent, every eye turning toward Elena, who felt the full weight of the suggestion settle over her, along with a strange, steadying certainty that had nothing to do with fear at all. I will do it, she said quietly, before Draven could object. I did not ask for this crown, and I do not want a war fought over it either. If there is a way to end this without every pack in these mountains losing sons and daughters over Vane's ambition, I have to try. It is dangerous, Draven said, his voice tight with a concern he did not bother to hide. If your gift fails before that many wolves, or if Vane's forces do not hesitate the way lesser numbers might, you would be entirely exposed. Then you will simply have to make certain I am not standing there alone, Elena said, meeting his eyes steadily, feeling for the first time since her arrival at the stronghold that she was not merely reacting to danger thrust upon her, but choosing, deliberately, the path she wished to walk. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan positioned defensive lines along the narrow mountain passes regardless, unwilling to rely entirely on an untested gift no matter how much faith the old records placed in it, while Elias worked with Elena late into both nights, helping her practice calling upon her power through calm conviction rather than sudden fear, over and over, until she could summon at least a faint golden warmth on command, though whether it would hold before an army remained an open question neither of them could answer with certainty. Draven barely left her side during those final preparations, and though neither of them spoke openly of what had passed between them on the balcony before the news of Vane's escape arrived, something unspoken had settled firmly into place, a quiet understanding that whatever happened in the coming confrontation, they would face it together rather than as king and reluctant princess bound only by duty. On the morning of the second day, scouts confirmed that Vane's forces had reached the outer valley, exactly as predicted. Their numbers spread across the wide-open ground below the mountain's final approach. Draven's own forces gathered at the narrow mouth of the pass, a smaller but disciplined line of loyal wolves who had answered the call despite the short notice, ready to hold the ground if the confrontation turned to open conflict. Elena stood at the front of that line, dressed not in the elegant court clothing the stronghold's tailors had prepared for her in the days since her identity was confirmed, but in simple, practical clothing much closer to what she had worn her entire life in Ashwood, a deliberate choice she had insisted upon that morning. They need to see the girl who survived 17 years of being erased, she had told Draven while dressing that morning, not a stranger playing dress-up as royalty. If my blood and my cause are meant to call upon their loyalty, let them see exactly who is asking for it. Vane rode at the front of his own gathered force when the two sides finally came within sight of each other across the valley floor, his posture still carrying the same practiced confidence Elena remembered from the council hall, though something harder and more desperate had settled into his features since his escape. You should have stayed hidden, girl, Vane called across the distance between them, his voice carrying clearly on the still morning air. 17 years of peace, undone because an old servant pack could not properly bury a secret. The peace you speak of was built on a lie, Elena called back, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the tight fear coiling in her stomach. A family murdered, a crown stolen through fire and silence. That is not peace, Vane. That is simply a crime that went unanswered for too long. Vane's jaw tightened and he raised a hand, signaling his gathered force forward, wolves shifting into a slow, deliberate advance across the valley floor. Draven's own line tensed in response, but Elena stepped forward before anyone could move to stop her, walking out into the open space between the two gathering forces, alone, exactly as the old records had described. Elena, Draven called, urgency sharp in his voice, though he did not move to physically stop her, trusting the choice she had made 2 days earlier, even as every instinct clearly screamed against allowing it. She stopped roughly halfway across the open valley floor, close enough now that she could see individual faces among Vane's gathered wolves, young and old, some clearly hardened fighters, others little more than frightened conscripts swept up in Vane's promises or threats over the years. She thought of Callum, back in Ashwood, and of every wolf who had ever been told their worth depended on rank rather than character. She thought of Grant Halden's guilt, of Mira's trapped grief, of 17 years spent believing she was nothing simply because powerful men had decided her existence was inconvenient. She closed her eyes, and rather than reaching for fear, she reached instead for everything she had learned to believe about herself over these past strange weeks. The certainty that had grown quietly beneath every trial and confrontation since Draven's horse had first stopped in the Ashwood yard. When she opened her eyes again, the golden warmth rose behind them, stronger than it ever had before, no longer a sudden defensive flare, but something steady and deliberate, spreading outward from her like warmth radiating from a hearth fire on a cold night. She raised her voice, and though she did not shout, it carried across the valley with a clarity that seemed to reach every wolf gathered there. "My name is Elena Voss," she called out. "I was raised believing I was nothing, an unranked servant with no family and no worth. I have learned since then that I carry the blood of a family murdered by the very man leading you into this valley today. I do not ask you to fight for a crown, or for old loyalty to a bloodline most of you have never known. I ask you only to consider whether the man who has led you here, through threats or promises, is a man worth dying for, when the truth of his crimes has already been confirmed before a full council." A murmur rippled through Vane's gathered forces, uncertainty flickering visibly through their ranks. Vane, sensing the shift, urged his horse forward, raising his voice to override hers. "Do not listen to her tricks," he shouted. "She uses old blood magic to cloud your minds. Hold your ground." But the golden warmth surrounding Elena only grew steadier in response, and she felt, for the first time, something shift within her understanding of her own gift. Not a force that clouded minds at all, but simply a clarity that stripped away fear and manipulation, allowing each wolf standing in that valley to see plainly, perhaps for the first time in years, exactly what they were being asked to sacrifice their lives for. One by one, wolves at the edges of Vane's gathered force began lowering their weapons, stepping back from the advancing line, uncertainty transforming into open refusal as the golden light continued to spread its quiet clarity across the valley. Vane watched his carefully built army begin to dissolve before his eyes, his expression twisting from confidence into open desperation. "Cowards," he snarled at his wavering forces, before turning his horse directly toward Elena, drawing a blade Elena had not noticed hidden beneath his cloak. "If they will not finish this, I will finish it myself." He charged across the remaining distance between them with startling speed, and Elena, though her instinct screamed to flee, forced herself to stand her ground, calling upon every ounce of the steady warmth still coursing through her. As Vane closed the final distance, blade raised, the Draven's own horse thundered across the valley floor, intercepting the charge at the last possible moment, meeting Vane's blade with his own, in a clash of steel that echoed across the suddenly silent valley. The fight was brief but fierce, Draven's years of discipline and control ultimately overwhelming Vane's desperate, reckless strikes. Within moments, Vane found himself disarmed and pinned beneath Draven's superior strength, his final desperate bid for freedom and vengeance finally, completely ended. "It is over, Vane," Draven said, his voice carrying across the now silent valley. "Your army has abandoned you. Your crimes have been confirmed. There is nothing left for you to fight for." Vane said nothing further, his expression finally, fully collapsing into the exhausted defeat of a man who had spent 17 years running from a truth that had finally, completely caught up to him. Draven's guards moved forward to secure him properly this time, additional precautions ensuring no further escape would be possible, while the remaining wolves of his scattered, uncertain army began approaching Draven's own forces, some kneeling immediately, others simply standing quietly, waiting to learn what fate awaited them now that the man who had led them into this valley had been so thoroughly defeated. Draven addressed them directly, offering clemency to those who had been coerced or misled, rather than willingly complicit in Vane's crimes, and slowly, the tension of the valley eased into something closer to relief, the threat of open conflict dissolving as quickly as it had gathered. Elena felt the golden warmth finally recede from behind her eyes, leaving her suddenly, overwhelmingly exhausted, her legs threatening to give out beneath her the moment the immediate danger passed. Draven was at her side instantly, catching her before she could stumble, his arms steady and warm around her in a way that felt entirely different from every formal, careful interaction they had shared since her arrival at his stronghold. "You did it," he said quietly, relief evident in every word. "You ended this without the bloodshed I feared we could not avoid." "We ended it," Elena corrected softly, leaning into his support without hesitation, for the first time since this entire impossible journey began. I could not have stood in that valley with any confidence at all, if I did not know you were standing behind me." In the weeks that followed, the kingdom slowly settled into a new stability, Vane's trial concluding with a permanent sentence that finally closed the door on the crime that had haunted the Nightshade line for 17 long years. Elena was formally crowned before the full assembly of the 12 packs, no longer the invisible Omega scrubbing floors in a forgotten corner of Ashwood, but Queen Seraphina Nightshade, standing before her people in her own right, her past no longer a source of shame but simply the foundation of a strength few in that hall could claim to match. Draven stood beside her throughout the ceremony, and when the moment came for the kingdom to formally recognize their union, joining the Cross and Nightshade lines together as equals rather than mere political alliance, Elena felt, for the first time in her entire life, that she was standing exactly where she belonged, not because a bloodline demanded it, or because old prophecy required it, but because she had chosen this path, this crown, and this king, with her own clear and steady heart. Callum arrived from Ashwood for the ceremony, standing proudly among the invited guests, and Grant Halden, humbled but sincere, offered his continued service to the crown he had once been sworn to protect in secret. Even Mira, watching quietly from the edges of the gathered crowd, found a measure of peace in seeing the girl she had failed to fully protect finally standing safe and strong before an entire kingdom. Elena Voss, once erased so thoroughly from pack history that even her own name had been stripped away, stood now as Queen Seraphina Nightshade, her story no longer one of loss and hidden shame, but of survival, truth, and a crown reclaimed exactly where it had always belonged.